Orphaned immigrant helps elderly neighbor, never suspecting the man is actually his grandfather. Mateo Alvarez thought about this strange twist of fate as he swept the walkway leading to Mr. Kowalski's front door. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have imagined forming a connection with anyone in this cold, unfamiliar city, let alone the gruff old man who lived next door. But life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. The late October wind bit at his exposed skin, a harsh reminder of how different this place was from the warmth of his homeland. At 23, Mateo had already experienced more loss than most people face in a lifetime. His parents' death in a car accident when he was 18 had left him adrift, forcing him to leave university and eventually his country in search of opportunity. The only thing he had left of them was his father's worn leather wallet and his mother's small silver locket containing their wedding photo, treasures he guarded fiercely. America had not been the land of opportunity he dreamed of. His engineering degree from back home meant little here without the proper certifications. Instead, he worked 2 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop and evenings washing dishes at a busy restaurant, barely making enough to afford the tiny studio apartment in this aging neighborhood. Mateo's breath fogged in the chilly air as he paused his sweeping. The old Victorian house before him had seen better days, much like its owner. Peeling paint, sagging gutters, a roof missing several shingles. It was a monument to neglect. Not unlike the man himself. "You missed a spot." The gravelly voice startled Mateo from his thoughts. Mr. Kowalski stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. At 78, he carried his years in the deep lines of his face and the permanent stoop of his shoulders. His silver hair, always neatly combed despite his otherwise disheveled appearance, caught the weak sunlight. "Good morning, Mr. Kowalski." Mateo forced a smile, though the older man rarely returned the gesture. "I'll get to it right away." The elderly man grunted, blue eyes narrowing as he watched Mateo work. Those eyes, sharp and observant despite his age, always seemed to be studying him, looking for something Mateo couldn't understand. It had started 3 months ago. Mateo had been returning home late from his restaurant job when he'd spotted Mr. Kowalski struggling with his garbage cans in the rain. Without thinking, he'd rushed to help, ignoring the old man's initial protests. The next day, Mr. Kowalski had knocked on his door, offering $20 for Mateo to clear his walkway of wet leaves. Mateo had refused the money but done the work anyway. Something about the proud old man living alone had struck a chord. Perhaps it was because Mateo understood loneliness all too well. What had begun as occasional help had evolved into a regular arrangement. Twice a week, Mateo would spend his precious free hours helping with yard work, minor repairs, or grocery shopping. Mr. Kowalski had eventually insisted on paying him, and Mateo's tight budget had forced him to accept. "You should wear a proper coat," Mr. Kowalski commented, his accent, Eastern European of some kind, thickening his words. "This isn't your tropical paradise." Mateo bit back a retort. His thin jacket was the warmest thing he owned, and there wouldn't be money for a new one until next month at the earliest. "I'm fine, sir. The work keeps me warm." Mr. Kowalski made that sound again, half grunt, half dismissal, before retreating inside. "When you're done out there, the kitchen sink is leaking again." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Mateo alone with the wind in his thoughts. He didn't understand why he continued to help someone so prickly and ungrateful. Yet something kept drawing him back to this house, to this man who seemed perpetually disappointed with the world. Inside, the house was like stepping into another era. Heavy furniture, faded photographs, and the pervasive smell of old books, and something distinctly European, some spice Mateo couldn't name. Today, there was also the scent of fresh bread. Mr. Kowalski sat at his kitchen table, a newspaper spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose. Without looking up, he gestured toward the sink. "Tools are under there, and there's coffee if you want it." This was new. Mr. Kowalski had never offered him anything before. "Thank you." Mateo poured himself a cup, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers. The coffee was strong and bitter, but wonderfully hot. As he worked under the sink, tightening the loose connection, Mateo noticed something tucked behind the pipes. A small tin box. Curiosity got the better of him. Making sure Mr. Kowalski was still absorbed in his newspaper, he carefully pulled it out. The box was old, its once bright paint now faded. Inside were photographs. A young woman with a baby, a couple on their wedding day, and other moments frozen in time. What are you doing?" Mateo startled, bumping his head on the underside of the sink. Mr. Kowalski stood over him, his face thunderous. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Put that back. The old man's voice shook with anger or something deeper. Some things aren't meant for prying eyes. Mateo carefully returned the box, shame burning his cheeks. I apologize, Mr. Kowalski. I was just leave when you're done. The old man turned away, shoulders rigid with tension. Mateo finished the repair in uncomfortable silence, the warmth of the earlier coffee offering replaced by a cold knot in his stomach. When he finally emerged from under the sink, Mr. Kowalski was gone, but an envelope with his payment sat on the table. Next to it was a brown paper package. Hesitantly, Mateo opened it. Inside was a dark blue wool coat, obviously new but with the price tag removed. A small note read simply, "Winter is coming." The simple act of kindness, so unexpected from the gruff old man, brought a lump to Mateo's throat. He tried on the coat, a perfect fit, warm and solid against the chill that had been his constant companion for weeks. When he went to thank Mr. Kowalski, the old man's bedroom door was firmly shut. Mateo left quietly, the new coat wrapped around him like a promise. That night, in his tiny apartment, Mateo dreamed of home. Not the apartment he'd shared with his parents, but somewhere older, hazier in his memory. A place with green hills and someone singing softly in a language he barely remembered. He woke with tears on his face and his mother's locket clutched in his hand. The next few days passed without seeing Mr. Kowalski. Mateo wore the new coat everywhere, grateful for its warmth as November deepened and the first hints of snow appeared in the forecast. He worried about the old man, though. Had he overstepped by looking at those private photographs? Was Mr. Kowalski ill? On Friday, unable to contain his concern any longer, Mateo knocked on the Victorian's door. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Worry turned to fear. The old man lived alone. What if he'd fallen? What if he was hurt and couldn't reach the phone? Mateo tried the handle. Unlocked. Heart pounding, he pushed the door open. Mr. Kowalski? It's Mateo. I just wanted to check if you're okay. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mateo moved cautiously through the rooms, calling out occasionally. The kitchen was empty, dishes from breakfast still in the sink. Unusual for the meticulously tidy old man. When he reached the study, he found Mr. Kowalski slumped in his armchair, eyes closed, an open book fallen to the floor beside him. Mr. Kowalski! Mateo rushed forward, panic rising in his throat. He touched the old man's shoulder, relief flooding through him when Mr. Kowalski stirred. What? Who's there? The old man's voice was weaker than usual, confused. It's Mateo, sir. Your neighbor. Are you ill? Mr. Kowalski blinked slowly, recognition dawning. The boy. Yes. I must have dozed off. He attempted to sit up straighter, but fell back with a grimace of pain. Let me call a doctor. Mateo insisted, already reaching for his phone. No doctors. Mr. Kowalski's tone was firm despite his obvious weakness. Just a touch of flu. Been fighting it for days. Have you eaten anything? Taken any medicine? The silence was answer enough. Mateo straightened, decision made. I'm going to make you something to eat, and then we'll see about medicine. No arguments. He added when Mr. Kowalski opened his mouth to protest. To his surprise, the old man simply nodded, too exhausted to fight. In the kitchen, Mateo worked quickly, making a simple soup from the ingredients he found in the well-stocked pantry and refrigerator. As the soup simmered, he explored the bathroom cabinet, finding fever reducers and cold medicine. When he returned to the study with a tray, Mr. Kowalski had managed to sit up properly, though his face remained pale and drawn. You didn't have to do this, he muttered, but accepted the bowl of soup with trembling hands. Careful, it's hot, Mateo warned, settling into the chair opposite. And yes, I did have to. We look after each other, right? That's what neighbors do. Something flickered across Mr. Kowalski's face, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion Mateo couldn't name. Where I come from, Mateo continued, filling the silence. Everyone takes care of each other. My mother used to make the same soup whenever anyone was sick. Where is that? Where you come from? Mr. Kowalski asked, the question seeming important somehow. A small town near Merida, in Mexico. Nothing special, but it was home. Mateo's throat tightened unexpectedly. He rarely spoke of home anymore. It hurt too much. Mr. Kowalski studied him over the rim of his soup bowl. And your parents? They are still there? Mateo shook his head, looking down at his hands. They died. Car accident. 5 years ago now. I'm sorry. The words were simple but sincere. They fell into silence again, but it was different now. Companionable rather than strained. After ensuring Mr. Kowalski took his medicine, Matteo prepared the bedroom, turning down the covers and filling a glass of water for the nightstand. The old man accepted his help with reluctant gratitude, allowing Matteo to support him as he made his way slowly up the stairs. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on you," Matteo promised as he prepared to leave. "Is there anything you need from the store?" Mr. Kowalski, already half asleep, mumbled something Matteo couldn't catch. Then more clearly, "The coat. It fits?" Matteo smiled. "Perfect. Thank you again." "Good, Nemrin. Yeah, good." "That's good." The old man's eyes drifted shut. Matteo left quietly, locking the door behind him. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season were beginning to fall, melting as they touched the ground. He pulled his new coat tighter around him, feeling as if something important had shifted between him and his elderly neighbor. He returned the next morning, and the next, caring for Mr. Kowalski through the worst of his illness. The old man's gruffness gradually softened, though he remained a man of few words. Instead of speaking, he began sharing in other ways, leaving books he thought Matteo might enjoy on the side table, playing records from his extensive collection while they ate dinner together. One evening, about 2 weeks into this new routine, Mr. Kowalski gestured toward a chess set displayed on a shelf. "Do you play?" Matteo nodded. "My father taught me. I'm not very good, though." We'll see." The old man set up the board with practiced movements, his hands steadier now that his health was returning. They played in comfortable silence, the only sounds the tick of the clock and the soft click of chess pieces against the board. Mr. Kowalski won easily, but without gloating. As they reset the pieces for another game, he spoke unexpectedly. "My wife taught me to play. Magdalena. She was a champion in our village." It was the first time he'd mentioned a wife. Matteo waited, sensing there was more. "She died giving birth to our son." Mr. Kowalski's fingers lingered on the queen piece. I did not handle it well. I'm sorry," Matteo said softly, understanding now some of the sadness that seemed to permeate the old house. "My son grew up, married a Mexican woman he met at university. They had a child." Mr. Kowalski's voice grew distant. "We had a falling out. My fault entirely. My pride, my old world thinking. By the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. They died in an accident before I could make amends." Matteo felt a strange prickling at the back of his neck. "That's terrible. Did you ever meet your grandchild?" Mr. Kowalski shook his head slowly. "No. The boy was sent to his mother's family in Mexico. I tried to find him, but they wanted nothing to do with the father who had rejected his own son's marriage." He looked up, his blue eyes intense. "I don't blame them." Something about the story resonated with Matteo in a way he couldn't explain. His own grandparents had died before he was born, or so he'd been told. His mother rarely spoke of her parents, and his father had been equally reticent about his family. "What was your son's name?" Matteo asked, curiosity overcoming politeness. A sad smile touched Mr. Kowalski's lips. "Eduardo," though he preferred Eddie. Eduardo Kowalski. The name hit Matteo like a physical blow. Eduardo, his father's name. But his father's surname had been Alvarez, not Kowalski. It must be coincidence. It had to be. Yet doubt crept in, insistent and unsettling. His father had been fair-skinned, with light eyes unlike Matteo's mother or anyone in her family. There had been old photographs of him as a child with a man whose face had been carefully cut out. And sometimes, when angry or upset, his father would mutter words that weren't Spanish or English, words that, thinking back, had sounded Eastern European. "Are you all right, boy? You've gone pale." Mr. Kowalski leaned forward, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "I'm fine," Matteo managed, though his heart raced. "Just tired, I think. Maybe we should finish this game tomorrow?" The old man nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to press. "Of course. You've been working too hard between your jobs and playing nurse to an old man." "I don't mind," Matteo said truthfully. Despite his inner turmoil, he meant it. These past weeks with Mr. Kowalski had been the first time since his parents' death that he'd felt something like belonging. That night, sleep eluded him. Matteo lay awake, turning over the possibilities in his mind. Could it be true? Could Mr. Kowalski be his grandfather? And if so, why had his parents never told him? He thought of the tin box hidden behind the kitchen pipes. The photographs inside might hold answers, but he couldn't bring himself to invade Mr. Kowalski's privacy again. Instead, he reached for his mother's locket, the one possession he had that connected him to his past. Inside was the tiny wedding photo, his mother radiant in her simple dress, his father handsome and proud beside her. Matteo had looked at it thousands of times, but tonight he studied his father's face with new intensity. The shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. They could be Mr. Kowalski's features, softened by youth and happiness. And there, in the background, partially visible, was that a chess set? Sleep finally claimed him near dawn, his dreams filled with fractured images, chess pieces moving by themselves, his father speaking in a strange language, snow falling inside his childhood home in Mexico. The next day was Saturday, and Mateo was grateful he didn't have to work. He needed answers. After a quick breakfast, he made his way to Mr. Kowalski's house, uncertain of what he would say, but knowing he couldn't continue with this question burning inside him. The old man answered the door promptly, looking stronger than he had in days. Good morning. I've made coffee. They settled in the kitchen, steam rising from their cups, the chessboard between them on the table. Mateo tried to focus on the game they'd started, but his mind kept returning to the impossible connection he suspected. You seem distracted, Mr. Kowalski observed after Mateo made a particularly poor move. Something troubling you? It was now or never. Mateo took a deep breath. Mr. Kowalski, this might sound strange, but what was your daughter-in-law's name? Your son's wife? The old man's hand froze halfway to a chess piece. Why do you ask? Please, it's important. Mr. Kowalski set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Her name was Lucia Alvarez, before she married my son. The room seemed to tilt. Lucia Alvarez, his mother's name. Mateo's hands trembled as he reached for his wallet, extracting the small photograph he kept there. A family portrait taken on his 16th birthday. Is this them? He slid the photo across the table. Mr. Kowalski stared at the image for a long moment, his weathered fingers hovering just above the surface as if afraid to touch it. When he finally looked up, his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Where did you get this? They're my parents, Mateo said simply. Eduardo and Lucia Alvarez. The chess pieces scattered as Mr. Kowalski's hand jerked in shock. Neither moved to pick them up. The old man's face had gone ashen, his breathing shallow. Mateo, he whispered, the name sounding different in his mouth somehow. Mateo Eduardo Alvarez? Mateo nodded, his own vision blurring. They never told me about you. I thought all my grandparents were dead. In their eyes, I was... Mr. Kowalski, his grandfather, covered his face with trembling hands. God forgive me, I was... The silence that followed was heavy with decades of loss and regret. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the world in soft white. When Mr. Kowalski finally lowered his hands, his face was transformed by grief and wonder. You have his eyes. Eduardo's eyes. How did I not see it sooner? I didn't see it either, Mateo admitted. Not until you told me about your son last night. His grandfather rose unsteadily, moving to a cabinet in the corner. He returned with a dusty photo album, handling it as reverently as a sacred text. I kept everything, he said softly. Every newspaper clipping about their accident, the obituaries, the few photographs I had of them. He opened the album to a page showing a young man who could have been Mateo's twin. Your father at your age. Mateo stared at the image of his father. So young, so full of life, standing proudly in front of an engineering school. The same path Mateo himself had followed. He wanted to be an engineer from the time he was a boy. Mr. Kowalski, no, his grandfather said, as if reading his thoughts. Always building things, fixing things. Like you. They spent hours poring over the album, filling in the blanks of their shared history. Mr. Kowalski spoke of Eduardo's childhood, his brilliance in school, his stubborn streak. He confessed his own failings. His anger when Eduardo fell in love with a Mexican exchange student. His cruel words about her background, his refusal to attend their wedding. I was raised with old prejudices, he admitted, shame evident in every line of his body. I couldn't see past them until it was too late. By the time I realized what I'd lost, they had moved to Mexico, changed their name to her family's. When I finally tracked them down, they had died just months before. And me? Mateo asked quietly. Did you look for me? His grandfather nodded, eyes distant with painful memories. For years, but your mother's family had disappeared with you. I hired investigators, but Mexico is a big country, and they had no reason to want me to find you. He looked up, something like wonder crossing his face. And then you appeared next door, like a miracle. Not a miracle, Mateo said. I found this neighborhood because it was affordable. That's all. Is it? The old man smiled faintly. I'm not so sure. Your father used to say there are no coincidences, only connections we don't understand yet. They moved to the living room as afternoon faded to evening, the snow outside now falling heavily. Matteo built a fire in the old fireplace while his grandfather prepared a simple dinner. They ate together, continuing to share stories, beginning the delicate process of building a bridge across the chasm of years and loss. "You must have questions about them," his grandfather said as they sat before the fire, the remains of their meal pushed aside. "Things I might know that you don't." Matteo had 1,000 questions, but one rose above the others. "Why did they never tell me about you? They never mentioned my father had been born in America, or that his name had once been Kowalski." His grandfather sighed heavily. "I imagine they wanted to protect you from my rejection. And perhaps in time they might have told you. They might have even reached out to me. We'll never know." He stared into the flames. "The last letter I sent your father was returned unopened. That was about a year before the accident." Matteo thought about that, about his parents carrying this secret, about the pain they must have felt. Yet he couldn't remember them ever seeming bitter or angry when speaking of the past. They had built a good life, filled with love and laughter despite their estrangement from his father's family. They were happy, he said suddenly, wanting his grandfather to know this. They loved each other very much, and they were good parents. Tears spilled freely down the old man's cheeks now. "Thank you for telling me that. It helps." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire. Snow continued to fall outside, insulating them from the world, creating a pocket of time where only this remarkable discovery existed. "What do we do now?" Matteo finally asked. His grandfather considered the question. "Now we begin again, if you're willing. I've been alone a very long time, Matteo. Having you in my life these past weeks, even not knowing who you were to me, it's been a gift I never expected." "I've been alone too," Matteo admitted. "Since they died, I haven't really belonged anywhere." "You belong here," his grandfather said firmly. "This house, it should have been your father's. Now it can be yours when I'm gone." Matteo shook his head. "Don't talk like that. We've only just found each other. At my age, boy, death isn't something to fear or avoid talking about. It's a fact." His grandfather smiled, the expression softening his features. "But I'm not planning on going anywhere just yet. We have too much catching up to do." The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the world was transformed by snow, pristine and full of possibility. "Stay here tonight," his grandfather suggested. "Your father's old room is still made up. And tomorrow, if you're willing, help me bring some of those boxes down from the attic. There are things of Eduardo's, of your father's, that should be yours now." Matteo nodded, a lump in his throat making speech difficult. "I'd like that." Later, lying in what had once been his father's bedroom, surrounded by books and model airplanes preserved exactly as they had been decades ago, Matteo felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before his parents' death. The circle of his life, broken for so long, was beginning to close. In the months that followed, grandfather and grandson built the relationship they should have had all along. Mr. Kowalski, whom Matteo now called Dziadek, the Polish word for grandfather, helped Matteo apply for engineering certification programs. Matteo moved into the Victorian house, taking the small apartment over the garage, giving them both independence while remaining close. They established new traditions: chess on Sunday afternoons, cooking together on Wednesday evenings, Matteo teaching his grandfather his mother's recipes, his grandfather teaching him Polish dishes from his childhood, and working side by side to restore the old house to its former glory. Spring arrived, melting the last of the snow. In the backyard, they discovered perennial flowers pushing through the soil, planted decades ago by Matteo's grandmother, tended by his father as a boy, and now blooming again under Matteo's care. A fitting metaphor for their family, broken but not destroyed, finding new life when least expected. On a warm day in May, as they worked together, painting the front porch, Matteo's grandfather paused, brush in hand. "I never believed in second chances," he said quietly. "After what happened with your father, I thought my punishment was to die alone, forgotten by my only family." He looked at Matteo, his blue eyes clear and bright in the spring sunshine. "I was wrong. Sometimes the universe gives us exactly what we need, even when we don't deserve it." Matteo set down his own brush, moved by the simple truth in his grandfather's words. Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's just about being open to the possibility when it comes. His grandfather nodded thoughtfully. "Your father would have said something like that. He always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." He reached out, placing a paint-spotted hand on Matteo's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, boy, and I think they would be too." The words filled a hollow space inside Matteo that he hadn't realized was still empty. Pride, belonging, family. the things he'd lost and found again in the most unexpected way. That evening, they sat on the newly painted porch, watching the neighborhood come alive with spring activity. Children rode bikes along the sidewalk, couples walked dogs, other elderly residents tended carefully to their gardens. It was nothing like the small Mexican town where Mateo had grown up, yet somehow, improbably, it had become home. "I was thinking," his grandfather said, breaking their comfortable silence, "that perhaps this summer we might take a trip to Mexico, to visit your mother's family if you're in touch with them, and to see where you grew up." Mateo turned to him in surprise. "You'd want to do that?" "I would. I should have gone there years ago to meet them, to apologize for my stubbornness. It's long overdue." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Unless you think they wouldn't welcome me?" "My aunt might be hesitant at first," Mateo admitted. "She was very protective of my mother. But I think she would come around, especially when she sees how things are between us now." His grandfather nodded, seeming relieved. "Good. Yeah, good. That's settled then. We'll make plans." As twilight deepened around them, Mateo thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. The grief that had driven him from his homeland, the struggle to build a new life alone, the simple act of helping an elderly neighbor that had led to this extraordinary discovery. Orphaned immigrant helps elderly neighbor, never suspecting the man is actually his grandfather. The sentence that had once described his situation now seemed too simple, too clean for the messy, beautiful reality they had created together. He looked at his grandfather, this man who had been a stranger less than a year ago and was now the center of his world, and felt profound gratitude for whatever twist of fate had brought them together. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious over there?" his grandfather asked, breaking into his thoughts. Mateo smiled. "I'm thinking that sometimes the things we're looking for find us, instead of the other way around." His grandfather considered this, then nodded slowly. "Wise words. Your grandmother used to say something similar, that love has its own map, and sometimes we just need to trust it to lead us home." Home. Yes, that was it exactly. After years of drifting, Mateo had found his way home. Not to a place, but to a person, to a shared history, to the family he thought was lost forever. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, grandfather and grandson sat together in companionable silence, their shared blood and newfound bond stronger than the years and misunderstandings that had kept them apart. They were at last exactly where they were meant to be.